General Hospital spoilers for Monday, July 28 reveal that in what was meant to be a celebration of love and survival, Willow's wedding day instead became the setting for a catastrophe that would send shockwaves through every corner of Port Charles. Months of delicate planning, carefully chosen flowers, heartfelt vows written in secret, and dreams built on the fragile foundation of hard-won hope all came crashing down in a single, suffocating moment of betrayal. As she stood in front of the mirror in her wedding gown, the same one she once believed would symbolize her triumph over illness and despair, Willow could feel something gnawing at her chest, not nerves, but dread. And when the truth finally found her, whispered not in malice but pity, everything inside her fractured. Drew Kane, the man who had promised to build a future with her, who had helped guide her through the darkness of cancer recovery, who had sworn devotion in the face of death itself, had been sleeping with Nina Reeves. The revelation was so violently unthinkable that her mind struggled to accept it. But the evidence was undeniable. It had been going on for weeks, maybe longer, buried under smiles and lies, all while Drew had continued to look Willow in the eye and speak of forever. The magnitude of the betrayal was staggering. Nina wasn't just a stranger or a former flame, she was the very woman who had spent years playing tug-of-war with Willow's sense of family, of truth, of identity. The woman who had been at the center of one emotional storm after another, and who had never fully earned Willow's trust. Now, to learn that Nina had seduced Drew, intentionally or not, was more than a personal wound. It was the unearthing of every fear Willow had fought to silence. She felt humiliated, shattered, and ultimately, unrecognizable to herself. In that moment, surrounded by silk, lace, and the soft sounds of a string quartet warming up just outside the ceremony hall, Willow made a decision not out of impulse, but necessity. She ran. Not with tears streaming dramatically down her face, but with the controlled fury of someone who refuses to be a pawn in her own life. She slipped out the back entrance of the venue, clutching her dress. Her bouquet left discarded like the memory of the love she thought was real. Her departure was so swift, so surreal, that guests didn't even notice at first. Carly had been sitting near the front, proud and expectant, oblivious to the rupture that had just occurred. Michael, nervous for his sister but glowing with joy, continued scanning the room for signs of Willow's entrance. And Drew, standing at the altar, trying to control his breathing, had no idea that the truth had already reached her, and that she had vanished. The silence that followed her disappearance was suffocating. When the bridal march played and no bride appeared, murmurs began. A quiet tension gripped the room. Then came confusion. Panic. A message passed from one corner of the venue to the other. Until finally Carly stood up, her face pale with dawning horror. Michael checked his phone, his expression twisting as he read the message Willow had sent only moments before she fled. "I can't do this. Don't come after me. I need to disappear." What followed was pandemonium. Drew, unable to process what had happened, stood frozen. The ceremony fell apart in silence. Guests rising from their seats, trying to avoid eye contact, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Nina remained conspicuously absent, perhaps already warned. Perhaps choosing to vanish from the fallout, but her name hung in the air like poison. Carly's fury ignited immediately, her instincts spinning between protecting Willow, shielding Michael, and confronting the woman who had once again destroyed everything she loved. But there was nothing anyone could do. Willow was gone. And she didn't just leave the wedding, she left Port Charles entirely. Willow's disappearance sent tremors across the community. The girl who had fought so hard to reclaim her life after her illness was now running from it. Rumors began to spread. Some said she was in Florida. Others claimed she was seen boarding a train north. The truth was that Willow had retreated into anonymity, checking into a quiet inn under a false name, shedding the identity of a heartbroken bride and becoming something else entirely. A woman who refused to let betrayal define her. In the solitude of her exile, she replayed every memory of Drew, his reassurances, his warmth, his support, and each time, the imagery was colored by bitterness. How many of his smiles had been lies? How many nights had he returned to her bed after lying in Nina's arms? It wasn't just the affair. It was the theft of dignity. The humiliation of being paraded in front of family and friends while her fiancé had already abandoned her behind closed doors. It was the realization that Drew had not only betrayed her body, but her recovery, her strength, her trust. The man who had been at her side during chemotherapy, who had lifted her through pain, who had promised her peace, had become a stranger overnight. But as the hours passed in quiet seclusion, Willow's sorrow turned to something else, clarity. She would not be a victim. She would not return to Port Charles to be pitted, or to stand awkwardly in hospital corridors while the world whispered about her broken engagement. She would return only when she was ready to reclaim her narrative, and when she did, she would no longer be the woman who needed saving. She would be the storm. Back in Port Charles, the fallout was unfolding rapidly. Carly, enraged and deeply wounded on Willow's behalf, cornered Drew in a vicious confrontation that nearly tore their partnership apart. Michael, devastated, took leave from ELQ to search for his sister. The Corinthos family fractured again under the weight of another scandal. Sonny, torn between his estranged daughter-in-law and the woman he once loved, tried to stay neutral, but neutrality in this storm was betrayal in itself. Nina, though silent at first, eventually emerged with her own twisted justification. She claimed it hadn't started with malice, that she and Drew had been lonely, isolated, that it just happened. But for the town, her words only confirmed what they had long suspected. That Nina's chaos was incurable, and her ability to devastate the lives around her was not a matter of accident, but pattern. Meanwhile, Drew tried to salvage his image. He publicly admitted to the affair, expressed regret, and insisted that he never stopped loving Willow. But his apologies rang hollow. His face was no longer that of the steady, reliable partner, but of a man who had traded a future for a fleeting moment of selfishness. The hospital staff looked at him differently. The Quartermains distanced themselves. And those who once admired him now saw a shadow of a man haunted by the woman he'd driven away. When Willow finally returned weeks later, her entrance was quiet but commanding. She wore no makeup, no designer labels, just steel in her eyes and silence on her lips. She didn't return to reclaim Drew. She didn't seek revenge. She returned because it was her town too, and she was done hiding. Her presence alone shook the people who had wronged her. Her silence cut deeper than any words. And though she said nothing at first, everyone understood, Willow Tate was no longer a fragile survivor. She was a reckoning. And Port Charles would never forget the day she walked away from her wedding and into her own power. In the darkest corners of Port Charles, a new storm has begun to form, silent, watchful, and deeply unsettling. Jason Morgan, long known for his cold precision and unshakable instincts, has started to sense something wrong, something that can't be explained by logic or routine threat assessments. It begins subtly at first, like a whisper in a crowded room or a shadow that lingers too long in the hallway. But soon, it becomes undeniable. Dalton, the enigmatic and recently arrived figure cloaked in charm and manufactured goodwill, is hiding something beneath the surface, something twisted, dangerous, and possibly connected to one of the most jarring events in recent memory. Britt Westbourne's return from the dead. The town had barely caught its breath from the shock of seeing Britt alive when new layers of suspicion began to surface. Her reappearance, miraculous on the outside, was wrapped in questions no one had answers for. Where had she been? How had she survived? And more importantly, who had brought her back? It's a question that Jason can't shake. And the deeper he digs into Dalton's movements, his connections, and the strange inconsistencies in his past, the more he begins to believe the unthinkable. Dalton isn't just connected to Britt's return. He may have orchestrated it. Or worse, controlled it. Jason observes the erratic nature of Dalton's behavior. Behind the polished facade, there's something wrong. His eyes shift too quickly. His answers are too rehearsed. He appears in places he shouldn't know about, speaks of events he couldn't possibly remember. There's a pattern, one Jason recognizes not from law enforcement manuals, but from experience. Dalton has the markings of a man who has been engineered, manipulated, or programmed for something far larger than he lets on. And Jason knows all too well what that kind of manipulation looks like. He lived it. He fought to escape it. And now he sees the same flickers of unnatural obedience and cold detachment in Dalton. It's not paranoia, it's muscle memory. But what sets this new threat apart is that Dalton doesn't act like a traditional enemy. He ingratiates himself into conversations. He earns the trust of doctors, nurses, and even Britt herself. And Jason watches, powerless for the moment, as Dalton positions himself closer to the people who matter. With every calculated move Dalton makes, Jason's suspicion morphs into obsession. He starts pulling surveillance. He tracks Dalton's background, finds that certain periods of his life have been scrubbed clean. There are no records of his medical history. No high school. No photographs beyond 5 years ago. It's a ghost trail, one that reeks of WSB involvement, or worse, something deeper. Something that doesn't want to be found. Britt, now reeling from her own trauma, doesn't see it, at least not yet. She's grateful to be alive, emotionally torn and unsure of her place in a town that thought she was dead. Dalton becomes a confidant, a stabilizer. Someone who seems to understand her nightmares. But Jason sees it for what it is, psychological conditioning. Britt is being studied, watched, possibly manipulated again, and Dalton is at the center of it. He warns her. She pushes back. She's not ready to believe that the man who helped her survive is the same man who may have controlled her captivity. And so Jason acts. Quietly, forcefully, without asking for permission. He begins a series of countermeasures, bugging Dalton's devices, shadowing his meetings, and intercepting strange communications between Dalton and an anonymous contact traced to Istanbul. The name, Project Sigil, appears, connected to neuroconditioning and cognitive programming. The pieces begin to snap together. Britt wasn't just taken. She was re-engineered. And Dalton, or whatever his real name is not a rescuer. He is a handler. The revelation horrifies Jason, but also ignites him. He's seen how deep this kind of manipulation can go. He knows what it's like to lose pieces of yourself and never get them back. If Dalton is a product of a larger experiment, and if Britt is its living proof, then this isn't just about saving her. It's about stopping whatever horror is coming next. Jason begins working with Brick and Spinelli, coordinating off-grid intelligence, trying to connect Dalton's appearance to other resurrections. Including rumors of secret WSB facilities that never officially existed. Dalton, sensing Jason's scrutiny, becomes more erratic. His calm exterior begins to crack. He lashes out at minor inconveniences. He stares at people too long. He begins repeating phrases, as if triggered by unseen cues. And Britt, caught in the emotional chaos, begins to question what she thought she remembered. She recalls voices in sterile rooms. Lights too bright. People in masks giving her injections. She begins to wonder, did she escape? Or was she released? The paranoia grows. Jason starts suspecting that Dalton wasn't just involved in Britt's return, he may be involved in controlling others in Port Charles. Jason's nightmares return. Old WSB memories flash. And suddenly, nothing feels safe. If Dalton is here as a sentinel of some larger plan, then who else is part of it? Who else has been watched? Who else has been touched by Project Sigil without knowing? Jason prepares for confrontation. But this won't be like before. He can't simply eliminate Dalton without answers. He needs proof. And he needs Britt to trust him before it's too late. Because the scariest part of it all isn't just that Dalton might be dangerous, it's that he might not even know it. He could be a sleeper agent. Programmed with objectives he's not even conscious of. One command away from detonation. And if that command comes, everything, including Britt, could be lost again. Jason feels the walls closing in. The line between past trauma and present danger is disappearing. Dalton is watching. Jason is hunting. And Britt, caught between the two, may be the key to stopping a catastrophe that no one in Port Charles sees coming. What began as suspicion has now become obsession. What began as fear is now war. And what Dalton represents is more than manipulation. It is a blueprint of control, of madness, and of a new era rising beneath the city's fragile peace. Jason will not let it happen. Not again. Not this time. Not if he can burn it all down first. Portia once believed she could control everything. She believed that her role as a disciplined, ethical doctor, a woman who measured every step, who weighed every consequence, would be enough to hold together the fragile foundations she had built in both her professional life and her personal world. She had walked the halls of General Hospital with authority, advised with clarity, and maneuvered through scandal with cautious strength. But nothing had prepared her for the chaos that Drew was becoming. What began as a calculated effort to help him navigate his implosion after the affair with Nina had turned into a dangerous miscalculation. Portia thought she could contain the damage. She believed that by helping Drew salvage his dignity, she could prevent a wider collapse. Instead, she unleashed a vengeance that is now tearing her life apart from the inside out. Drew had nothing left to lose. His reputation was in ruins. His relationship with Willow had exploded in betrayal and humiliation. His identity, once stable and composed, had deteriorated into a hollow shell of strategic bitterness. And when Portia, in her misguided sense of control, tried to manage his narrative behind closed doors, she gave him exactly what he needed, a target. She had information, sensitive medical documents, experimental recovery data, internal memos, all related to his time post-WSB and the questionable treatments he had received under her care. She thought hiding the anomalies would protect them both. She thought discretion would avoid scandal. But Drew interpreted it as manipulation. Betrayal. And now, he wants blood. Portia begins to feel the weight of her own decisions as Drew, with a cold, quiet fury, begins launching a campaign not of violence, but of precision sabotage. It begins with an anonymous leak, a clipped audio recording sent to local press in which Portia's voice can be heard saying she adjusted information to protect the patient from scrutiny. The context is missing, but the implication is damning. Within days, the hospital launches an internal review. Jordan, previously an uneasy ally, is forced to open an inquiry. Curtis starts asking questions, his face tight with suspicion. And Portia, once steady in the face of crisis, begins to unravel. But Drew doesn't stop there. He moves like a man possessed, cold, strategic, and terrifyingly patient. He gives interviews, paints himself as a man betrayed by the system, a subject of medical interference and unethical experimentation. He never names Portia. But he doesn't have to. The connections are easy to make, and public sympathy begins to turn. Portia becomes a villain in a story she thought she was helping write. She tries to fight back. She digs into Drew's records, looks for gaps, inconsistencies, anything that could paint him as unstable, compromised, or even delusional. But Drew has already covered his tracks. He knows how to play the media, how to manipulate silence, and worst of all, how to turn people's doubts into fuel. And when Britt returns to Port Charles with fractured memories of medical captivity, of cold lights and clinical voices, and when her descriptions echo the same technology and vocabulary that once existed in Portia's research files, the net tightens. Portia realizes that this isn't just about Drew. It's bigger. Britt's trauma, Dalton's erratic behavior, Jason's emerging investigation, all threads pointing back to a system of control. One Portia may have inadvertently enabled through her partnerships with research labs that promised innovation but delivered violation. Jason starts asking questions. Not out of accusation, but out of urgency. He recognizes the markers: mind control, memory alteration, the weaponization of medical science, and Portia begins to see the horrifying possibility that she may have participated in something far more dangerous than she ever realized. Every move she makes is now under a microscope. Every decision from the past year is being reinterpreted through a new lens of suspicion. What was once protective is now deceptive. What was once noble is now unethical. And Drew, cold, unblinking, continues to build his case in the public eye, not through outbursts, but through slow, corrosive storytelling. Portia tries to talk to Curtis, but there's a wall now, built from too many secrets. Jordan watches from a distance, unsure whether Portia is a victim or an architect. Even the hospital board, once fiercely loyal, begins to pull away, driven by fear of scandal and public backlash. And Portia, in the silence of her office, sees it all slipping away. The control she clung to is gone. Her name is tainted. Her work is weaponized. And the worst part is, she doesn't know where it ends. Drew's revenge isn't just personal. It's systematic. He isn't just destroying her career. He's redefining her entire legacy. And no matter how fiercely she fights, every move now feels like another piece falling into Drew's design. What started as damage control has turned into war. And Portia is no longer the strategist. She's the target.